As rare as it appears to be, an international feature or intellectual property making waves in a Western setting is nothing new. However, only in the last few years has it seemed like non-English language properties have been embraced by the masses rather than drawing a smaller, kitschy, yet devoted fan base. You may be able to point towards Parasite becoming the first non-English language film to win the Best Picture Oscar as the moment when international storytelling finally gained some legitimacy among Western audiences. It was a landmark moment for the film industry, and the critical and commercial success of Bong Joon-ho's satirical Parable would help pave the way for Japan's Drive My Car to become a Best Picture nominee itself just 2 years later. Moreover, Denmark's Another Round, Norway's The Worst Person in the World, and Italy's The Hand of God have proven to be such major hits among critics and audiences in the time of the coronavirus that they just barely missed the cut. For having such a wide-spanning film industry to speak of, one of the biggest in the world for that matter, one of the few countries whose perception among Western audiences hasn't changed much has been India. That is until the spring of 2022, when the Indian-produced historical epic RRR was released. The film was introduced to Indian and North American theaters in March and made the eventual transition to Netflix by early May. But the film proved to be so popular among those who saw it that word of mouth eventually necessitated a theatrical re-release. Even with the convenience of streaming at their disposal, audiences were too entranced to resist seeing the film the way it was meant to be seen one more time. RRR's re-release helped it become the third highest grossing Indian film of all time. So the question has to be asked, what is it about this particular film that has won Western audiences over? Changing perceptions. In a good year, the Indian film industry typically produces anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 films each year, nearly 3 times as that of the United States and Canada. Yet the Western perception of Indian cinema has always been skewed, in large part because of the cultural dominance of Bollywood cinema. The Bollywood cinema of Mumbai is what many Western audiences immediately think of when thinking about Indian filmmaking. And while the industry is still a force in the country, its overall presence is not nearly as great as people tend to think. Going off the circumstances of its production alone, RRR bucks that perception because it's not a Bollywood film, it's a Tollywood film. Rather than producing films in Hindi, Tollywood is based in Hyderabad and places a significance upon the Telugu language of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. The kinds of filmmaking that occurs between the two industries is similar, what with the ultra-stylized fight choreography, larger-than-life and clearly defined heroes and villains, and epic song and dance routines. In that regard, it just might be the most important distinction if it means that mass audiences in North America have realized that there's more to Indian cinema than they think. While that difference certainly distinguishes RRR, the reason why North American viewers are going bananas for the film is deeper than that, and it requires an understanding of the trajectory their own film industry is heading toward.
It's one of life's mysteries, sir.
The current competition. The Hollywood film landscape has become so saturated that the output is practically predictable by today's standards. Big-budget franchise films, sequels, and needless reimaginings of once-beloved classics have seized control of the West and have left little room for originality. One of the biggest runaway hits of 2022, the Daniels' Everything Everywhere All at Once, is a rare exception, delivering a stunningly original story with mind-blowing execution on an impressive budget. Nevertheless, you can certainly chalk up its crowd-pleasing experimentation to the fact that it was distributed by A24, an independent film company that has been encouraging experimentation since its inception. The day a company like Disney, Universal, or Warner Brothers takes a chance on a film like that, while also letting the filmmakers bring their vision to life, will be the day Morbius takes home an Oscar.
This is incredibly special.
All hope isn't lost for the Hollywood machine, of course. If the acclaim directed toward The Batman and Top Gun Maverick is any indication, these existing properties can still deliver what their audiences want while finding new ways to stretch the limits of what's possible in blockbuster filmmaking. However, as great as these movies are in execution, and as much as we tend to use a word like fresh when describing them, they also coast off nostalgia and the convenience of already having a beloved universe to work with.
I'll change my mind. Your love is right.
Their intensity and excitement aren't lost, but they rather represent a sense of lost greatness.
Vengeance.
As studios are more than willing to throw away hundreds of millions of dollars on uninspired projects that, in the grand scheme of things, just don't mean anything. RRR is something of an antithesis to all of this, but before we can hope to realize why, let's talk about what the film is about. What exactly is RRR? The film is set during the British occupation of India in the 1920s and follows the fictionalized exploits of two of the country's most celebrated revolutionaries, Alluri Sitarama Raju and Komaram Bhim. In reality, the two never met, but the film envisions a scenario in which they not only did meet, but also became the best of friends. In the film, Raju, or Ram as he's referred to, and Bhim begin as two men with opposing philosophies regarding their anti-colonialist values. One is in the employment of the British police and is assigned to hunt down the other, who is one with nature and acts on behalf of Telangana's Gond tribe. But over the course of the film's sprawling 3-hour runtime, the two come to a mutual understanding of one another and work together to rescue a young Gond girl who's been taken prisoner by a ruthless British governor and his equally sadistic wife. The film has the setup of an historical revenge thriller in the vein of Steven Spielberg's Munich or Edward Zwick's Defiance, but the reality is that it's so much more than that. Not only does the film freely play around with historical liberties to the point of unbelievability, but it does so with the awareness of a massive blockbuster that knows precisely what to do with every dollar and cent it's afforded. It has seemingly no bounds in the way it manages to incorporate drama, high-octane action, elements of buddy comedy, romantic comedy, fantasy, and show-stopping musical numbers into a single story, not to mention a story with a deep, searing political message. It may be sour towards the real-life racism that undoubtedly inspired the characterization of its British villains, but it also has the sincerity of its central friendship and the genuine thrill of its stylized action to ensure that it's not a downer. The execution of a smart, action-packed Hollywood blockbuster can only afford itself so much critical acclaim when its premise is based on something the viewer has already seen. It often invites too much comparison to other projects to truly stand out on its own. Not to mention, so many franchise films are being produced today that it's kind of impossible for a single film to remain on people's radars before another film just like it comes along to steal the spotlight. You often hear phrases like superhero fatigue being thrown around today, especially in regard to the ever-expanding transmedia storytelling of the Marvel Cinematic Universe across multiple viewing platforms, which is starting to become a little too grating and complex for fans to continue enjoying it the way they used to. RRR makes a case for the inverse, and not just because it stands proudly as a single film without the need for a continuation. How it ultimately executes its version of history may seem uninspired to some, but the film is more palatable than most North American cinematic spectacles because its story is steeped in Indian culture. Writer-director S.S. Rajamouli provides the audience room to believe in the film's originality simply because his story isn't based on anything that came before it. In doing so, it's fair to say that one of the biggest reasons RRR has become such a phenomenon in the West is because it represents much of what American filmmaking has lost, and more importantly, what audiences are desperate to see again. What the audience is missing out on. Tollywood itself is not unlike the Hollywood of yesteryear, where an actor's name alone is enough to drive promotion and hype surrounding a project. While the English-language film industry has plenty of marquee stars to speak of, such as Tom Hanks, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Meryl Streep, most of the industry's in-demand talents are remembered better as the characters they play in big movies rather than as the people they actually are. Can you think of anyone who would be putting Daniel Craig on a pedestal if he had never been cast as James Bond? Is it fair to say that Heath Ledger's legacy would be quite different if his swan song performance as the Joker never happened? And for further proof, recall how few people went to see Robert Downey Jr.'s Dolittle film even though the actor was reeling from the mega success of Avengers Endgame. With Telugu language films, there's an authentic, genuine appreciation for headlining actors that fans will ardently wear right on their sleeves. So it stands to reason why devoted viewers were excited beyond belief when they found out a director like Rajamouli, whose incredibly popular Bahubali franchise has elevated him to the kind of status that North American viewers would easily grant Steven Spielberg or James Cameron, would be working with two of Tollywood's biggest stars, Ram Charan and N.T. Ramarao Jr., who had reportedly never starred in a film together. In the eyes of Telugu-language film viewers, just seeing these actors on screen together combating real-life evil is an Avengers-level team-up, and it's been enough for many fans to interpret the film's alliterative title as a stand-in for the initials of its director and stars. It's that big of a deal. But the actors go further in solidifying their presence because the development of their characters is all based around the film's mesmerizing action sequences, which, though heavily reliant on CGI and slow-motion editing techniques, are so immersive that their apparent falseness is by no means a concern. RRR understands that it doesn't need to explain why the two protagonists are practically superhuman, just so long as it gives audiences a proper demonstration of how those abilities affect the narrative at large. If these two were American superheroes, the viewer would likely be subjected to a drawn-out explanation of how they came to be, which would have more than likely been unnecessary. Their respective introductions are pure, unadulterated cases of show-don't-tell. One is struck by how Ram mercilessly defeats a large riot in order to arrest a man, or how Bheem is able to go toe-to-toe with a tiger, but the important thing is that we're not caught off guard by it. Furthermore, Rajamouli entrusts the audience not to let the film's historical setting hinder the extreme nature of the action. One recalls the simple pleasures of Raiders of the Lost Ark in the way that history and mythology become characters in and of themselves. When Ram and Bheem aren't leaping tall buildings in a single bound or throwing a motorcycle like it's a beach ball, they're saving a young boy from a fiery death using a rope and a flag. This act of heroism not only serves as the moment the two meet, unaware of each other's identities, but this kind of death-defying spectacle is what ultimately sets the tone for the rest of the film, with each subsequent action sequence proving to be just as enthralling and visceral as the Natu Natu dance sequence that arrives at a critical point in the film. It makes for an immersive experience, one where the blocking and shooting of each scene is far more important than how it's edited down. RRR leaves its physics and reality at the door, but it's a film that's proud not to contain itself and has all the more personality because of it. Perhaps the film's biggest boon is that it's just a blast from start to finish. It's a timeless story about the power of friendship and has sincerity for days. The chemistry between Junior NTR and Ram Charan evokes the dynamism of Paul Newman and Robert Redford during the film's fight sequences, and even shades of Abbott and Costello in the film's romantic subplot, in which Ram attempts to help Bheem impress the British governor's empathetic and beautiful niece. You get the sense that these two actors aren't complete without one another. Their introductory rescue sees them communicating non-verbally, and you realize that these two men have just found a kindred spirit they didn't know they needed. When they go their separate ways after the film's intense midpoint, you feel lost alongside them, which only makes their eventual reunion and fight against real-life evil that much more rewarding. Their adventures are both dramatic and undeniably nonsensical, made all the more enjoyable by the fact that the film takes its action seriously without the need to bust out a self-aware quip anytime the characters do something unexpected. These two are clearly heroes, and RRR wants nothing more than to celebrate that because what they accomplished in reality matters far more than any fictional recreation could ever convey. Unlike most Hollywood blockbusters, this is a film that has no one to impress and isn't burdened by expectations. It's confident in what it wants to be and what it ultimately becomes, and couldn't care less if viewers agree with the results. That's precisely what makes it not only one of the best movies of the year, but a film that Western audiences have done well to embrace. There's no telling if Hollywood will ever be able to fully recapture the magic of its glory days, but the example set by Rajamouli and the Tollywood system is a sure reminder that it can indeed be done.